So yesterday in my comments, somebody asked me, why is it that Mercury flatheads are more desirable than Ford flatheads? Damn it, that's a good question. And to answer this question, you need to know the two major differences between the two engines. After 1937, Ford made a number of improvements to their Ford flathead engines, one of which was cooling, the other was adjusting the cubic inch from 221 to 239. Now, the Mercury engines were essentially the exact same engine up until about 1948. Prior to 1948, the Mercuries ran a 3 3/4 inch stroke. I said stroke. So by 1948, the Mercury cars were getting a bit heavy for their 239 engines. So Ford did about the only thing they could do by adjusting out the engine from a 239 to a 255. The way that they did that was adjusting the stroke from 3 3/4 all the way up to a 4-inch stroke, keeping the rods exactly the same but shortening the tops of the pistons and adding 8cm heads, which were a high compression head. It was also said that the 8cms that came out of Canada had a slightly better foundry mix, which made the block harder and less prone to cracks. This unfortunately didn't seem to be as true with the US Mercuries, as there's not really any evidence or literature stating that the Mercury blocks in the US were any different than the Ford block. Now, this honestly brings up a really good point that I always like to point out when talking about this topic. Sellers of flathead engines will commonly tell you that the engine that they have is a Mercury engine. I don't care if it has Mercury heads and a Mercury intake. Always assume that is a Ford engine, because the only way that you can know for sure is to pull the pan or pull the heads and measure the stroke in the cylinder. And before you say you can just remove the spark plug and just run a rod down into the cylinder and measure the stroke, keep in mind that the spark plug sits above the exhaust valve, not over the piston. Now, what you're saying is not necessarily wrong. With some flatheads, you can actually do that from other manufacturers, Dodge being one of them. But Ford found that placing the spark plug above the exhaust valve was the optimal place for detonation. This same design was used in one of the fastest flatheads to come out of a factory. You may know it as the fabulous Hudson Hornet. And it's pretty well known that Hudson went on to really kick the snot out of a number of flathead Ford V8s.